Captain Daniel West stood at the bridge of his starship, the Resolute, and watched Earth grow smaller in the viewport. He had made this journey 1,000 times before. For 22 years, he had served the Galactic Council. He had answered their calls. He had buried his friends on alien worlds. He had never asked for anything in return. Today felt different. Today, humanity was finally asking for something. The Galactic Council had existed for 10,000 years. It was a gathering of the oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. They made the laws. They decided who mattered and who did not. And for 300 years, humanity had served them without question. When the Vorathi plague had swept through the Andromeda sectors, human doctors had volunteered. They had worked without sleep for months. Many had died from the very disease they were trying to cure. The Vorathi had never said thank you. When the Kethra homeworld had burned under asteroid fire, human ships had carried refugees to safety. Daniel himself had made 47 trips through burning debris fields. He still had scars on his hands from pulling survivors out of wreckage. The Kethra had accepted this as their due. When the Siloran trade routes had collapsed and billions faced starvation, human economists had rebuilt their entire system. They had asked for nothing. They had expected nothing. But now, after 3 centuries of service, humanity wanted one simple thing: a seat on the High Council. A voice in the decisions that shaped the galaxy. Recognition that they mattered. Lisa Grant stood at the podium in the Great Assembly Hall. She was Earth's diplomatic envoy. A woman who had spent her entire career building bridges between species. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her speech. But her voice was steady. Distinguished members of the Council, she began. Humanity comes before you today not as servants, but as partners. We have proven our worth through action. We have given our blood, our resources, and our children to this alliance. We ask only for what we have earned a permanent seat among you. The hall was vast. Thousands of representatives from hundreds of species filled the circular chamber. Some had bodies like insects. Others floated in water tanks. Some existed only as patterns of light. All of them watched Lisa with expressions she could not read. Ambassador Vexlar of the Torvani rose to speak. The Torvani were an ancient species, tall and thin with scales that shimmered like oil on water. They had been founding members of the Council. They considered themselves the wisest of all races. The human petition is noted, Vexlar said. His voice was cold and smooth. But Council seats are not given for service. They are reserved for elder species. Species with history, with culture, with wisdom. He paused and looked directly at Lisa. Humans are useful. We do not deny this. You are capable workers, strong, willing. But you are children still. Your species has existed for barely a heartbeat in cosmic terms. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, when you have matured, we might consider your request. Laughter spread through the chamber. It came in clicks and whistles and sounds humans had no words for. But the meaning was clear. They were being mocked. Every species in that room, many of whom owed their very existence to human sacrifice, found the idea of human equality amusing. Lisa stood frozen at the podium. She had prepared for rejection. She had prepared for negotiation. She had not prepared for laughter. Counselor Yithra of the Siloran spoke next. The Siloran were graceful beings with 4 arms and skin like polished silver. Humans had saved their civilization from economic collapse just 40 years ago. Perhaps the humans could be given observer status, Yithra suggested with a gentle smile. They could watch and learn. In time, they might understand how true civilizations conduct themselves. More laughter, more dismissal. Daniel watched the broadcast from his ship, his knuckles white against the console. Around him, his crew stood in silence. Many of them had lost family in service to the Council. Lieutenant Jake Morrison had buried his brother on a Kethra colony. Ensign Maria Santos had watched her mother die treating the Vorathi plague. They had given everything, and they were being laughed at. On the screen, Lisa gathered her documents. Her face showed nothing. Her voice was perfectly calm. We understand, she said simply. Thank you for your time." She walked out of the chamber without another word. She did not argue. She did not beg. She simply left. Within hours, the recall order went out. Every human vessel, every relief worker, every soldier and scientist and aid worker received the same message: return to Sol System. Effective immediately, Daniel received the order while his ship was docked at a Kethra station. His crew had been helping repair damage from a recent earthquake. They had been working for 3 days without rest. "Captain?" Jake asked. "What do we do?" Daniel looked at the station. Hundreds of Kethra were still waiting for help. They expected humans to finish the job. They always expected humans to finish the job. "We go home," Daniel said. The departure took 1 month. Human ships left their posts at border stations. Human doctors packed their equipment at hospitals across 100 worlds. Human teachers closed their schools. Human engineers shut down their projects. They did not explain. They did not complain. They simply left. Lisa Grant returned to Earth on a quiet transport. She had spent 30 years building relationships with alien species. She had believed that kindness and service would eventually be rewarded. She had been wrong. Director Nathan Cole met her at the spaceport. He was the head of the United Human Coalition, the governing body of all human colonies. He was a tall man, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. "I watched the broadcast," he said. "Then you know." "I know." He looked up at the stars. 300 years of service. 300 years of sacrifice. And they laughed at us. Lisa said nothing. There was nothing to say. "What happens now?" she finally asked. Nathan's expression hardened. "Now they learn what it means to live without us." The council barely noticed humanity's departure. They had other concerns, other servants to call upon. The humans would be back eventually, they assumed. Where else would they go? They were wrong. The silence had begun. And it would cost the galaxy more than anyone could imagine. 8 months had passed since the humans left. The galaxy continued to spin. The council continued to meet. Life went on as it always had. Or so everyone believed. High Counselor Zethari sat in his chambers reviewing reports. He was an ancient being, older than most stars in this sector. His species, the Vanthari, had been among the first to achieve space travel. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched countless species join the council and fade into history. The humans had been a footnote. Useful, yes, but ultimately forgettable. A junior aide entered with an urgent message. "High Counselor, the mining colonies in the Vexus Belt have gone dark. No communications for 6 days." Zethari waved a tentacle dismissively. "Send a response team." "The human emergency response teams have been disbanded, Counselor." They returned to Sol System with the rest. For a moment, Zethari paused. He had forgotten about that. The humans had always handled emergencies. It was what they did. "Then send the Torvani patrol fleet," he ordered. The Torvani fleet arrived 3 weeks later. They were not designed for rapid response. Their ships were built for dignity, not speed. Their crews were trained for ceremony, not crisis management. By the time they reached the Vexus Belt, a containment breach at the main processing station had already spread toxic gas through 6 connected habitats. 6,000 workers were dead. The survivors had run out of air 2 days before the Torvani arrived. Commander Kevin Park watched the news report from his apartment on Luna Colony. He had served at a border station near the Vexus Belt for 7 years. His team could have reached those colonies in 18 hours. They had done it before, many times. His wife Amy found him sitting in the dark, the news still playing on the screen. "You couldn't have done anything," she said softly. "We're not part of that anymore." "I know." Kevin's voice was hollow. "But 6,000 people died because nobody came in time. 6,000 people who would be alive if we had been there. They didn't want us there. They made that very clear." Kevin turned off the screen. She was right. That was the hardest part. Across the galaxy, small problems began to grow into large ones. The systems that humans had built, maintained, and operated did not run themselves. The relationships humans had managed did not manage themselves. The Siloran medical ships began failing first. Their fleet had been designed by Siloran engineers, but built with human assistance. The power systems used a hybrid technology that only human technicians fully understood. Without regular maintenance from crews who knew the systems, ships began breaking down one by one. Dr. Helen Torres had spent 15 years training Siloran medical staff. She had written the manuals. She had created the training programs. When she left with the recall order, she had offered to stay long enough to train replacements. The Siloran had declined. They were an ancient species. They did not need human teachers. Now their medical fleet was down to 60% capacity. Diseases that had been easily treated were spreading again. Hospitals that had been models of efficiency were overwhelmed. The Kethra refugee settlements faced different problems. After their homeworld burned, humans had helped the survivors establish new colonies. Human social workers had kept the peace between rival factions. Human administrators had distributed resources fairly. Without them, old conflicts returned. Within 6 months of the human departure, 3 settlements had erupted into violence. Thousands died in fighting that humans had prevented for decades. Governor Beth Adams had run the largest Kethra settlement for 12 years. She had mediated hundreds of disputes. She had been loved by the people she served. When the recall order came, the Kethra Council had asked her to stay. "We value your service," they had told her. "You may remain as an advisor, not as an equal, not as a partner, as a servant." She had politely declined and returned to Earth. Now she watched the settlement she had built tear itself apart. The Kethra Council sent her messages begging for advice. She did not reply. Director Nathan Cole addressed the United Human Coalition Assembly 9 months after the withdrawal. The chamber was full. Every human colony had sent representatives. They had all heard the reports. They all knew what was happening in the galaxy beyond their borders. "We have received 943 requests for emergency aid in the past quarter," Nathan announced. "From species that once called us children. From governments that laughed at our petition. From worlds that took our service for granted." He paused and looked around the room. "Our response to all of these requests will be the same. Polite acknowledgement. And nothing more." A murmur ran through the assembly. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I know what some of you are thinking," Nathan continued. "People are dying. We could help. We should help. It is what we have always done." He shook his head slowly. "For 300 years, we helped. We gave everything we had. And in return, we received laughter, dismissal, the message that we would never be good enough, no matter how much we sacrificed." He leaned forward on the podium. "We are not abandoning the galaxy out of cruelty. We are not seeking revenge. We are simply choosing, for the first time in our history, to put ourselves first, to build our own future, to use our resources for our own people." The assembly voted. The decision was unanimous. In the council chambers, Ambassador Vexillar reviewed the growing list of crises. The Torvani had always considered themselves superior to humans. They had been certain they could handle any challenge without human assistance. They had been wrong. "Perhaps we should send another invitation to the humans," his aide suggested carefully. "Express our appreciation for their past service. Offer them some small recognition." Vexlar's scales rippled with irritation. "The humans will return when they realize how much they need us. They cannot survive alone. They have no allies. No resources beyond their own system." He turned away from the reports. "Give them time. They will come crawling back." But the months passed, and the humans did not come back. The cracks in the galaxy grew wider. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, something ancient and hungry was beginning to stir. The first year of silence ended. The galaxy was starting to understand what it had lost, but the real lesson had not yet begun. 2 years had passed since humanity fell silent. The galaxy had changed in ways no one had expected. Worlds that had thrived now struggled. Alliances that had seemed unbreakable had begun to crack. And in the darkness beyond the galactic rim, something terrible had awakened. High Counselor Zethari received the first reports on a quiet morning. His aide entered the chamber with shaking hands. "Hi, Counselor. Our deep space sensors have detected movement in Sector 779. Zethari looked up from his documents. "Movement? Be specific." "The Morith Swarm, Counselor. They have emerged from dark space." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The Morith Swarm was the nightmare that every species feared. They were ancient creatures, older than the Council itself. They moved through space like locusts through a field, consuming everything in their path. Planets, moons, entire star systems. Nothing was left behind but dead rock and empty void. For 400 years, the swarm had been held at bay. A network of early warning stations watched the dark space where they slept. Rapid response fleets stood ready to meet any incursion. Defense platforms guarded the borders, systems that humans had built, fleets that humans had commanded, stations that humans had maintained. Zethari called an emergency session of the Council. The great chamber filled with representatives from every member species. Fear hung in the air like smoke. "The swarm is moving toward the inner systems," Admiral Vexlar reported. He stood before a massive holographic display showing the galaxy. A red wave of dots was advancing from the outer darkness. "At current speed, they will reach the first inhabited worlds in approximately 4 months. Deploy the defense fleet," someone called out. "The defense fleet." Vexlar hesitated. The defense fleet was primarily commanded by human officers. When they withdrew, we lost 60% of our experienced combat leadership. Silence fell over the chamber. "What about the early warning stations?" Counselor Yithra asked. "They should have detected the swarm months ago. Why are we only learning of this now?" "The stations have been degrading," another official admitted. "Human engineers maintained most of them. Without regular service, many have gone offline." Zethari felt cold spreading through his ancient body. He was beginning to understand something terrible. The humans had not simply been servants. They had been the foundation that held everything together, and the Council had kicked that foundation away. "Surely the humans will return now," he said. "The swarm threatens them as well." Admiral Vexlar pulled up a trajectory map. The red wave of the swarm moved through space like a spreading stain. The swarm's current path takes them through Torvani space first, then Siloran territory, then Kethra colonies. They will reach the galactic core in approximately 3 years. He paused. "They will not reach human territory for at least 11 years. The chamber erupted in frightened chatter. The Torvani delegates looked sick. 11 years was a long time. Time enough for humans to prepare. Time enough for humans to watch. "They could wait," Counselor Yithra said quietly. "Let us weaken ourselves fighting the swarm. Then move in as saviors. Demand anything they want." "That is what we would do," Zethari admitted. They sent a message to Earth that day. A formal request for aid. Not a demand. Not an order. A request. The Council had never made such a request before. The response came 3 days later. It was polite, professional, and utterly devastating. "The United Human Coalition acknowledges your message. We are aware of the Morith Swarm's emergence. We have confidence in the Council's ability to address this challenge. We wish you success in your efforts. Nothing more. No offer of ships. No promise of soldiers. Not even a suggestion of future help." Director Nathan Cole drafted the response personally. He knew what it meant. He knew millions would die. The weight of that knowledge sat heavy on his shoulders, but he also remembered the laughter in the Council chamber. He remembered 3 centuries of sacrifice rewarded with dismissal. He remembered being told that humanity was not worthy of respect. On the human border, Commander Kevin Park received orders to increase surveillance of Council space. His station tracked the swarm's advance with cold precision. Data flowed in constantly. Populations, ship movements, battle reports. "Sir," his communications officer said one day, "we're receiving distress calls from a Torvani colony. They're under attack." Kevin looked at the tactical display. The colony was just beyond human space. He could reach them in 6 hours. "Log the transmission," he said. Continue observation. Sir? Those are our orders, Lieutenant. The officer hesitated, then turned back to his console. Yes, sir. Kevin watched the display as the colony's signals grew weaker, then went silent. He felt something die inside him, but he kept watching. On Earth, retired General Scott Palmer followed the war reports from his home. He had trained officers from a dozen species. He had commanded joint fleets against pirates and raiders. He knew military strategy better than anyone alive. He knew the Council forces were making mistakes, fundamental errors that would cost millions of lives. Errors he could correct with a single communication. His granddaughter Megan found him in his study one evening. He was looking at old campaign medals, names of battles fought for species that had dismissed humanity as children. Grandpa, Megan said softly, we learned about the swarm in school today. Everyone is scared. Scott pulled her close. The swarm won't reach us for a long time. Sweetheart, you're safe. But what about the others? The aliens? Aren't we going to help them? Scott was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the friends he had lost in Council service. He thought about the years of sacrifice. He thought about the laughter. They told us we weren't good enough to sit at their table, he said finally. Now they have to learn to eat without us. Megan didn't understand. She was too young. But someday she would. The swarm continued its advance. Torvani Commander Grathel led the first major defense at the Vexus corridor. His fleet had been designed for patrol duty. His crews had never faced real combat. Humans had always handled the serious fighting. They fought bravely. They died bravely. On the 42nd day, the swarm broke through. Commander Grathel's final transmission was a single word in the Torvani language. It meant, forgive, but there was no one left to grant forgiveness. The galaxy was burning. And humanity watched in silence. 3 years into the war, the Galactic Council was dying. 18 worlds had fallen to the swarm. Billions of beings had been consumed. The great powers that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years now fought over scraps of territory and dwindling hope. Emergency sessions of the Council had become daily events. Representatives screamed at each other across the chamber. Ancient alliances crumbled as species blamed each other for the disaster. The Torvani accused the Siloran of withholding ships. The Siloran accused the Kethra of sabotaging supply lines. Everyone accused everyone else of cowardice and betrayal. But no one accused the humans anymore. The humans had become a ghost. A memory of better times that haunted every discussion. Counselor Yithra sat alone in her quarters after another failed session. She was old, even by Siloran standards. She had served on the Council for 200 years. She had watched humanity's petition being rejected. She had even smiled at Vexlar's speech about human children. That smile felt like a knife in her chest now. She remembered the human aid workers who had saved her own colony during the economic collapse. Kind people who asked for nothing. Patient people who taught without condescension. Good people who had been told they were not good enough. And she had smiled. Yithra made a decision that no High Counselor had ever made before. She would go to Earth herself. Not as a ruler summoning a servant. As a beggar, asking for mercy. The journey took 3 weeks. Human border patrols detected her ship immediately but did not interfere. They simply watched as she passed through their territory. Silent observers in a silent space. Earth was more beautiful than she had expected. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds drifting across the surface. She had seen thousands of worlds in her long life. But this one took her breath away. She landed in Geneva and was met by Derek Hayes. He was the secretary of the United Human Coalition now. A young man, by her standards. But his eyes held a weight that made him seem ancient. They sat across from each other in a simple conference room. No great chamber. No 1,000 witnesses. Just 2 people, and the fate of a galaxy hanging between them. Thank you for receiving me, Yithra began. Her voice trembled. Pride had always been her greatest strength. Abandoning it felt like losing a limb. You came a long way, Derek said neutrally. We respect the effort. 2 Fraz. I came because we are dying. Yithra's forehands pressed flat against the table. The swarm will reach the core worlds in 18 months. We have nothing left. Our fleets are broken. Our leaders are paralyzed. Our people are losing hope. She looked directly into Derek's eyes. We need your help. Without it, our civilizations will end. Derek was quiet for a long moment. He studied her face. The fear there. The desperation. Part of him felt satisfaction. Part of him felt sick. I watched your speech 3 years ago, he said finally. The one where you suggested humans could be given observer status. Where you said we might learn how true civilizations conduct themselves. Yithra closed her eyes. I was wrong. Yes, you were. I was arrogant. I was blind. I thought humans were useful tools. Nothing more. I did not see the people behind the service. She opened her eyes again. I see them now. Derek stood and walked to the window. Outside, human children played in a park. Laughing. Running. Unaware of the conversation that might shape their future. Do you know what happened after you rejected us? He asked. We grieved. For months. We grieved. Not because we were angry, but because we were heartbroken. We had loved the galaxy. We had given everything to it, and it had laughed at us. He turned back to face her. But then something interesting happened. We started building. Not for you. For ourselves. We reached out to the outer rim species you had always ignored, the ones too small or too new for the Council to notice. We formed new alliances. We developed new technology. We created a future that didn't depend on your approval. Yithra felt something cold settling in her stomach. You want revenge? No. Derek shook his head. That's what you don't understand. We're not angry anymore. We've simply moved on. We spent 3 years learning that we don't need you, that our worth isn't determined by whether ancient species consider us mature enough. He sat back down across from her. We're not refusing to help because we hate you. We're declining because we have our own concerns now, our own allies, our own responsibilities. We can't abandon them to save species that told us we didn't matter. But billions will die, Yithra whispered. Billions have already died. Derek's voice was heavy but firm. Billions who might have lived if your fleets had been better prepared. If your leaders had been better trained. If you hadn't spent centuries letting humans do the hard work while you congratulated yourselves on your superior culture. Yithra had no response. Everything he said was true. We didn't create this crisis, Derek continued. You did. By treating us as servants instead of partners. By never bothering to learn how to function without us. By assuming we would always be there to clean up your mistakes. He leaned forward. You taught us that we didn't belong at your table. So we built our own table. And honestly, we prefer the company. Yithra sat in silence for a long time. The conference room felt smaller somehow. The weight of history pressing down on every surface. Is there nothing we can offer? She finally asked. No price we can pay? Derek considered the question carefully. Maybe someday, when this is over, there can be a new relationship. But it won't be built on you giving us a seat at your table. It will be built on you coming to ours, as equals. Without any expectation that we owe you our service. He stood again, signaling that the meeting was over. I hope you survive, counselor. I genuinely do. But that survival is not our responsibility anymore. You made that clear 3 years ago. Yithra left Earth the next day. She returned to a council that was falling apart. She reported her failure to leaders too consumed by their own fears to process what it meant. The galaxy had rejected humanity. Now humanity had rejected the galaxy, and the swarm kept coming. The swarm reached Torvani Prime in the 4th year of the war. The species that had laughed loudest at humanity's petition was the first of the great powers to fall completely. Ambassador Vexlar stood on the highest tower of his capital city as the sky turned dark with enemy ships. He had lived for 3,000 years. He had believed his species was immortal. He had believed they were superior to all others, especially the young, eager humans who served so willingly. The last thing he saw was fire. Commander Laura Bennett watched from an observation post at the edge of human space. Her station tracked the fall of Torvani Prime through long-range sensors. Every death, every destroyed city, every silent cry for help that would never be answered. She was 42 years old. Her parents had been diplomats who served the Council for 30 years. She had grown up believing that service to others was the highest calling. She had joined the fleet to make a difference. Now she watched a civilization die and did nothing. "Commander," her tactical officer reported, "we're receiving distress signals, civilian transports, thousands of them trying to escape." Laura closed her eyes. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to help. It was what humans did. What they had always done. What they had been born to do. "Log the signals," she said. Her voice did not shake. "Continue observation." "Commander." "Those are our orders, Lieutenant." The officer turned back to his console. He was young. He did not understand yet. But someday he would. On Earth, the Coalition Assembly met in emergency session. Footage from Torvani Prime played on massive screens. Cities burning, children running, ships exploding, an entire species crying out for salvation that would not come. Some assembly members wept openly. Others sat in rigid silence. Every human in that room felt the same terrible weight. They could help. They had the power. The question was whether they should. Secretary Derek Hayes took the podium as morning light streamed through the windows. "I have heard the arguments for intervention," he began. His voice was heavy with exhaustion and grief. "I feel their weight. Believe me, I feel it." He looked out at the assembled representatives. "We could save them. Even now. We could deploy our fleets and turn the tide. We have the technology. We have the warriors. We have the will." He paused. "But if we save them now, what have they learned? That human compassion can be manipulated through guilt? That our principles bend under pressure? That 300 years of service means we will always come back, no matter how badly they treat us?" The chamber was silent. "We offered everything we had, freely and without condition, for 3 centuries. They took our gifts as their natural right. They mocked us for our generosity. They told us we weren't worthy of the respect we had earned." Derek's hands gripped the podium. "We are not cruel. We are not seeking revenge. But we are done teaching the galaxy that human kindness has no limits. If we are ever to be seen as equals, they must first understand what they lost when they threw us away." The vote was close. Closer than any vote in Coalition history. Hands trembled as they were raised. Tears fell as the count was announced. In the end, humanity remained silent. The swarm burned through the core worlds for another 2 years. The Siloran fell next, then the Kethra remnants, then a dozen lesser species. The great Galactic Council that had endured for 10,000 years ceased to exist. Its chamber became a tomb. Its records became dust. Internal conflicts and resource depletion finally caused the swarm to fragment. They had consumed everything worth consuming. Without more prey, they turned on each other. Within months, the once unstoppable horde had scattered back into the darkness from which it came. The galaxy was quiet at last, but it was the quiet of a graveyard. In the aftermath, the survivors looked around at what remained. The great powers were gone. Their worlds were empty. Their fleets were debris. 10,000 years of civilization had been erased in 4, but humanity remained. Human colonies had flourished during the chaos. Protected by distance and preparation, they had continued to grow. Human technology had advanced far beyond what the old council had achieved. Human alliances with the Outer Rim species had created a new network of trust and cooperation. Where the old powers had demanded obedience, humanity had offered partnership. Where the old powers had taken tribute, humanity had given aid. The Outer Rim species remembered this. They remembered who had treated them with respect. When the new Galactic Congress convened, it was not in an ancient council chamber. It was in a human-built station, orbiting a human colony world. Representatives came from across the galaxy, survivors of the great species, leaders of the Outer Rim. all of them looking to humanity for guidance. Laura Bennett stood at the podium. She had been promoted to High Ambassador after her distinguished service during the crisis. It was strange, she thought. She had watched civilizations burn. She had followed orders she hated. And now she was being asked to lead the very species who had once laughed at her people. "We welcome you to this new era of galactic cooperation," she said, her voice carried across the chamber. "We hope it will be built on mutual respect and genuine partnership." She paused and looked at the assembled representatives. Siluran survivors who had lost their homeworld, Kethra refugees who had lost everything. Even a few Torvani who had escaped the final destruction. "Let me be clear about something," Laura continued. "We are not here to rule you. We are not here to demand your service. That is the old way, the way that failed." She stepped around the podium and faced them directly. "But we have learned something these past 6 years. Something painful but necessary. Kindness without boundaries becomes exploitation. Service without respect becomes slavery. We will help you rebuild. We will share our knowledge and our resources. But we will never again accept being treated as less than equal." Her eyes found the Torvani delegation. Their scales had lost their shimmer. Their pride had been burned away. "You once told us that we were children," Laura said softly. "That perhaps in 1,000 years, we might be ready to sit among you. That time has passed. Not 1,000 years, but 6. And now you sit before us." She returned to the podium. "The price of our silence was terrible. I will not pretend otherwise. Billions died who might have lived. That weight will never leave us. But it was a price the galaxy chose to pay when it rejected our partnership." Laura looked out at the stars visible through the station's massive windows. "Let us build something better now, together, as equals, because we have all learned what happens when we don't." The Galactic Congress voted unanimously to accept human leadership of the reconstruction effort. It was not demanded. It was requested. Respectfully. Gratefully. The galaxy had discovered the price of human silence. They would spend centuries making sure they never heard it again.